Hello, Leon Vanderpol. I am so delighted to welcome you today. Thank you so much for your time and for your contribution, the work you've done.
Well, thank you for this invitation. Very much looking forward to what this conversation will bring for all those listening.
Yeah. So Leon and I, before the call, just did a little grounding, breathing, and for me, just kind of checking in with, what wants to happen in Leon's words, as we surrender to some of the deep transformational work. We begin to invite what wants to happen rather than our predetermined ideas. And so, as we explore this, Leon and I spoke about being sort of experiential and playing around with that. So we are starting there.
Yeah, a good place to start. What wants to happen? I love that question, right? That it can be asked in any moment if we just let go of the busyness of the mind for a moment and just rest, and we ask, okay, so in this moment, what wants to happen in me? What's that experience I may be desiring? Or in the situation around me? What's emerging here?
There feels like there's an act of faith in that question, right? Like there's this surrender to what is rather than the coercive imposition of our will onto what is. And for me, that's really a big part of the essence of faith, which feels a lot like a free fall, is, just that what wants to happen, not what do I want to happen, what wants to happen in this other person in relation to me in life and spirit, kind of all of these forces together, how do I just tune into that rather than imposing my narrow-minded ideas about what should be?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I could not have said it better. That's the way it is. It's about my will. I want this to happen. I have this goal or this desire or this need or this want, and I go for it. And it's sometimes at the expense or of whatever is happening around me because I'm focused on making that happen. And just loosening that a bit, letting that drop so that we can, I use the word attune to, so what is happening around me of which I'm a part that is trying to emerge through me. So there's this sense of partnership with life that happens where I'm no longer, as you said, imposing, but partnering with.
Yes.
And it changes the whole game.
Yes. And I like to think of it as a conversation. Like when you start to tune into spirit, you start to feel like the world is speaking to you and everything is speaking to you. And there's this dynamic relationship with the world and with spirit. And sometimes I use the word God. I don't mean it with any religious, connotations. It's just sort of a placeholder for spirit or different words that we might use, the universe. Sometimes I use these words interchangeably. But for me, it's like, oh, that's really interesting. This dynamic relationship with the universe in which it no longer feels like this sort of desouled, material, empty, meaningless place. And I'm this lonely, isolated, consciousness trapped in a body. All of a sudden, it's like there's this non-dual consciousness that emerges as we engage in this surrender. And at the essence of that for me, Leon, and this is where, I've participated in the deep transformational coaching intensive. And it was so eye-opening for me. It felt like this crystallization of work that I've done over my lifetime of learning which voice to listen to. And your emphasis on trusting your inner knowing really crystallized lessons from many years. And what I've found is that this act of self-trust is also an act of faith, and it's the essence of faith. And it's also an act of self-healing. When I trust myself, I'm actually healing myself at the same time because I'm saying, I'm not sure why that is, but I believe it to be true. So I'll let you jump in there.
Yeah, it's perfect. And I've noticed from that self-trust space, there's an extension to what we could call trust in life.
Yes.
Do I trust in life? Life has, this is the thought. Life has let me down so many times. Life continues to let me down. There have been things inflicted upon me, harms, disappointments, traumas. Life lets me down. What is to trust in life? And so when we end up there, of course, there's a guarding. And that's very much then when it's easier to just say, well, I might as well just, I know that, okay, I can trust myself to some degree, but I don't really trust other people. So I can count on me, but I can't count on others. I can't count on life. But
Yes.
there is actually not that much self-trust. That's the illusion. It might seem like, well, I'm the only one I can count on, but it's actually not a truth. The truth is that there is somewhere is a lack of trust in self, a really deep, profound lack of trust in self, and that extends into a lack of trust in life. But
Exactly.
when that melts, then the whole thing becomes kind of unified. I begin to trust in myself truly deeply in my knowing, as you said, and that extends then into, okay, this thing called life. How does it work to support me? How do I work to support it? And we begin to kind of reflect into that unified way of living, and then we start to experience it, and then the trust grows from
Yes,
there.
internal and external trust in self, life, others. Yeah, there's this reciprocity, this mutual kind of these feedback loops that start to develop as we do this kind of work. And oh gosh, what was I just thinking as you were speaking about that? Oh, the reflection principle is an idea that I've been playing around with, and it's sort of similar to that old saying, "As within, so without; as above, so below." And it's kind of what you're hearkening to here. It's like the things that we project onto the outside world are really just a reflection of what's happening internally. So if we can start to see life, I sometimes like to think of it as a little bit of a video game. If we can start to see life as this game, this series of obstacles and tests that are actually for our growth, for our edification, for our development, for our ability to transcend and become greater than we can possibly imagine. There's this dynamic, like, reflection principle is what I call it. There's this way in which everything outside of us is reflecting what's inside of us, and if we can engage with it that way, there's these rich opportunities in our challenges, rather than life's out to get me, I need to protect myself, that guarding thing that you were talking about, that distrust in self, distrust in other, and then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. And it's also extremely draining as
Yes.
a way to live, right? Your energy, your vital life energy just gets lost in the process. Life becomes hard, heavy, exhausting. There's stress, anxiety, worry, fear, all of that just kind of compiles within when all that trust and that unity feeling is gone. And then that
Yes.
has to be regained through what you're calling the reflection principle, as you said, beginning with the thought, okay, maybe all of this has a greater meaning for me. Maybe this is all some kind of a lesson that is here for me to learn about
Yes.
myself, about the nature of life, about the way it actually functions beyond my very narrow understanding of it, or what I've been taught by others to believe is true or not true about life. And if we can lean in just a little bit, and yeah, as you said, look for that. Well, what is that lesson? What is it that this is here to teach me about me, or about my relationship with others? Just in that moment, there's a gap of potential. And if we can go into that gap, we'll notice it really opens up a whole new world of possibility that we may not ever see when we're kind of locked into that framework of,
The Matrix.
this is hard, this is heavy, this is, the Matrix, that Matrix. Yeah.
It reminds me of a line of poetry I wrote recently. Offer your heart to the unknown. It is gestating within you a life larger than you can dream. I've just begun to cultivate a relationship to my own limitations and what I can't see, and to find home in that, because I can rely on my own inner knowing. But this brings me to an interesting point where there's some divergence in our expertise and skill sets that comes up for me, because, I wasn't prepared for this work. I don't think that if I had, even found you a year previously, I don't think I could have, I don't know that this is true, but I'm not sure I could have engaged with your work in the same way. I had a lot of shadow integration to do. I had a lot of, and your work really allows the space for that, actually. So I'm not sure that this is entirely true, but there was a way in which I needed a lot of permission and reassurance that, and I think I personally needed a lot of scaffolding to understand kind of the shadow elements of my experience before I was really ready to engage with your work in such a transformational way. And I think it would have been transformational at any point in my journey, but perhaps it's just at the particular moment that I, began the deep coaching intensive and read your book, I was so ready for it. It was just like, pow.
Mm.
It felt like this very, what's interesting for me is that one of the practices that's been most helpful for me is slowness, but it felt like such a quick, I didn't expect it. It felt like such a wow. I've been seeking, like, what's the modality for, what's the spiritual community, what's the peak experience, what's the mystical, what are the practices? And I've like experimented and dabbled with hundreds of different transformational and different kind of religious and spiritual practices. And none of it felt authentic to me until I read your book. And I was like, this is so simple. And I still get this, it's like the same experience of an altered state, but an altered state is like a compressed, compacted version. And this is like a slow, grounded, like it's the same experience without the being out of your kind of ordinary consciousness. You're out of your ordinary consciousness, but you're still grounded in your work in a way that a lot of the mystical and spiritual practices that allow you to glimpse that, just they don't keep you on the ground a lot of the time. That's like the opposite of what they're designed for. And they're sort of, I think, designed as like a compass, like, hey, there's this thing over here, have this experience, and then go find out how to actually get this into your daily life. But I think a lot of people become like peak experience seekers in a way. Yes. And that's sort of kind of what I was grappling with. It's like, how do I find a sustainable version of this? I know this is real. I'm having these experiences. They're quite profound. And yet it's not sustainable to be altered all the time, right?
No. And you hear about the mystics that have had such enlightening experiences, and they're basically dysfunctional for a couple of years as they learn to integrate that enlightened state of awareness into just daily doings, because so much can fall away, like the desire to care for the body or eat, drink. So I've never myself chased those experiences. They never, maybe it was that they seemed out of reach. They seemed greatly impractical. And I never went about thinking, maybe I should travel to India and go to an ashram and sit there for 9 months until I have that experience. Yeah. There must be some guru that can take me there. I never had that. I was always much more attracted to the idea of, well, you called it an altered state. Yeah. An altered state, but this functional altered state.
Yes.
Where I am maintaining in this lived material reality a very functional way of being.
Yes.
But one that is, let's call it the altered state. I like to use sometimes the term, the 5D world. It's this altered dimension, which functions very differently than that more, we'll call it 3D world. It's actually our 4D world, time and space. But that world where everything seems very solid and immutable, where laws seem very entrenched. And then we move to this new paradigm and recognize that a lot of what we've been taught is just of that world and not of a greater, more expansive reality. And if we can tap into that, and that really is the exciting journey for people, is realizing I can tap into that there is more that is possible in and through me. I don't necessarily understand it, but I can go about finding it. But keeping our feet really on the ground, deeply grounded in the world as it is.
And that's been my issue, as I was the person kind of looking for the guru and looking for the, magical thing that was going to, help me become enlightened. And what was so refreshing about finding you, as I shared with you when we first met, is I wasn't getting any of the weird narcissistic cult leader vibes, which is rare in the self-help community. Like, okay, that's a good first start. And then your work is just so grounded. It's not like, I have a real objection to the kind of new age culture that is very head in the clouds without feet on the ground. It feels wishy-washy, and it's not that they're not hearkening to some truth or grasping and expressing an element of truth, but there's something missing from the picture that makes me feel really unsafe in those communities, because it's so love and light and there's no room for the shadow. And it's almost like it's your fault if your life isn't going, I don't know. There's a lot of weirdness to that culture. And then there's that guru thing that, like, there's this guru acolyte sort of dynamic. That's the narcissism thing I was hearkening to. So in any case, I was so struck when I read your work. It was like, this is feet on the ground. This is so deeply grounded and practical. There's no weird, I have to do this breath work and I have to say this mantra or whatever, like there's no focus pocus, and yet the magic is there. That's what's so striking, because that's what I've been longing for so long. It's like, okay, I know I can get an altered state, but that's not, I don't want a temporary altered state. I want to enter into this non-ordinary reality, as the shamans call it, in a way that I can actually, function, as you say, in the world.
Yeah.
And so many spiritual people, it's hard. That's a hard balance, because I do notice when I'm spiritually inspired, it is difficult to stay grounded sometimes, because it's very, it's intense. It can be overwhelming. It can also be very peaceful and calm, but sometimes it can be activating because it's, there's a lot of energy.
Well, just noticing that a lot of people they're called to serve the world in some way. There's a desire to help the world. Many, like I was saying, people on the spiritual path, or people who are at least into personal growth and development, there's a desire to really be in the world and to help the world through whatever work, talent, passion they have. And they can get very disheartened by what they see on the news. And so what I find about this, let's just call it the feet on the ground reality, where we're still operating in this altered state of being in awareness, where we're beginning to understand this thing called the unified field, where life and us are not separate, but one. How do we support and work with? Is that it allows us to be much more of support in the world. Like, we begin to not just want to do it, but because it's such a practical way of existence, it is happening. It just begins to happen. Our work starts to take on meaning and matter. It becomes in itself very fulfilling and satisfying, no matter what work we do. That's the beauty of it. We start to find that the form of the work matters a bit less, because I'm now able to recognize that I am here to partner with life. And this is what life has in this moment brought me to. This is the circumstance. There's part of me that might say, I don't like it. But when we can let go of that just enough to, like, okay, so, but what wants to happen here? I move back into partnership. I recognize that where I am is the perfect place for me to be. There's a lesson here for me to learn. There's a way for me to begin to serve, to find meaning and fulfillment in my work. And that doesn't, again, mean that you love every aspect of your life or that it's all perfect. There's going to be a journey of reshaping the world around you to reflect more of that emerging inner experience. And the more that inner experience becomes joyful, meaningful, lightful, so by almost magic does the world around you when you're in partnership with it. But as you said earlier, there is that shadow side piece we have to attend to. If we're not actively seeking to look at all of that which keeps us from these more expansive, let's call them enlightened states of awareness, I mean, really do the work, no bypassing, do the work, then the movement into these other experiential states is far more natural, but also accelerated.
Yes.
But if we're just bypassing it, like, if I just sit here long enough, I'll be enlightened, and somehow all that
love and light,
it magically disappears, right? My ego is magically healed.
Yeah, I don't actually have to look at myself or take any responsibility or feel anything. I'll just be,
No, I just got to get there.
Yeah, exactly. So this brings us to the concept of the perfect functionality of dysfunction, which is very similar to something that I've written about, and thought about, that I call transformative destruction. So why don't you share how you define the perfect functionality of dysfunction, and we'll talk about a little.
The transformative dysfunction, or no, destruction, transformative destruction, you said.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So the dysfunction, the perfect functionality of dysfunction simply means that when people do decide to really lean into the work of personal transformation, which is to really go in and look at that way that we've been conditioned, really conditioned. We just underestimate the scale of the conditioning that we've taken in. But if we're really willing to look at that conditioned part of ourselves that said, this is the way the world is, and this is what you should believe, this is what you should value, this is how it should be structured. If you do that, you'll be safe and secure. You'll make it. You'll be successful, whatever. If you're willing to look at that, really question it as valid, and begin to entertain perhaps some other ways of perceiving and thinking, there is naturally going to be a kind of inner conflict between these two worlds, these two value sets, these two ways of perceiving. And that conflict is going to create a breakdown, because you will start to say, I'm not valuing this anymore. This is something I was taught. I never chose it. In fact, I think it's a bunch of baloney. But I don't yet know what I'm choosing either. I don't really know what I'm saying yes to. I just know I'm saying no to that. So this is the beginning of a kind of breakdown, which can feel internally confusing, disorienting. There's trepidation there. And that feels dysfunctional, because the known world, the world that I've known my whole life within me, is now cracking and breaking and falling into pieces. That can't be right. This can't be right. There's something wrong. So we try to cobble it together in some kind of way, but some way we know that cobbling it back together is not the way forward, but we don't really know the way forward. So we're in that dysfunction. But I say that's the functional part, is that that's the function of it. That's the function of transformation. There's a breakdown and a re-emergence of something that's more authentic and real.
Exactly. I think of it as, we have to wreck the old, structure to build something new that's, can hold more, that can go higher. And it's an iterative process, right? It's something that keeps emerging in different forms throughout our lives. And we can sort of learn to have faith in the process, even in those moments and, of the dysfunction or the destruction. And I think it's a really old mythological idea, death and rebirth, the phoenix from the ashes, Jesus on the cross, all of these are, mythological representations of this age-old process of refining our character and finding transcendence. That's what all of those images represent. And yet I feel like we've sort of lost the language of the spirit in our modern culture in the post-scientific revolution. We've been taught to think of ourselves as lonely consciousness, trapped in a body, separate from the world. And throughout history, that's not the way that people experience themselves. That's actually a framing that we've adopted. And we've created this operating system that is actually, we don't even realize is not our own, because it's so deeply ingrained. And so I think your work, for me personally, has allowed me, which I've longed for so long. And like I said, I've just I've been in the transformation space for a long time. So it's not like I haven't tried stuff before, and things have been helpful. It's not to say this is, what is it, stage 4? Is it stage 3 or stage 4 in the stages? Is it, I can't remember the stages.
The six stages of real power or personal power.
Yes.
Yeah, the stage of real transformative work seems to be what we call stage 4, power by reflection, which simply means that there's going to be a period where we move from the known world into the unknown world, where we have to go in and do that reflective work in ourselves. And that's the part that is deeply transformative, but also the part that feels deeply dysfunctional until we've started to learn the ways of this new paradigm, this altered state of reality, which has its own dynamics and patterns and ways of existing in it. But it's not something that's taught to us up front. We didn't go to school and get taught patterns of transformation. We didn't get taught patterns of, the 5D world, so to speak. We were just taught to live in this 3D world, to succeed, to get the grades, to whatever. So we don't know this. So this feels that dysfunction again. You mentioned the destruction of it, because it is a kind of destruction. And I just want to say, for me, it's not that we have to go about with a sledgehammer and tear down everything we've been taught. It's more organic than that. It's kind of happening of its own volition as a natural part of transformative growth.
Yeah, life just will naturally present us with the lessons, the precise lessons that we need, in order to transform and become the best versions of ourselves. And that's the idea of the reflection principle. Eckhart Tolle says, this is J.K. Rowling, rock bottom became the solid ground on which I built my life. And Eckhart Tolle says, every challenge is a disguised opportunity for salvation. It's kind of the idea behind the obstacle is the way, isn't it?
Yeah. Even Eckhart Tolle wrote, I think at the beginning of Power of Now, something about the night of his, let's call it enlightened transcendent experience, was a night of suicidal thoughts.
Wow.
Of wanting to end his life. So, at that moment, he was rock bottom. Now, it's hard to know what was the catalyst for that extraordinary shift. Most of us don't go through such great evolutionary leaps within the span of an evening. And those who do, he spent 2 years on a park bench, apparently, just trying to integrate what just happened. So you can see it's a little disorienting. But thankfully, most of us, it's a more gradual journey, but we have to really pay attention to the journey. And we still have to live our lives. Like, it's kind of like this everyday awakening kind of thing. Like, how do I awaken? How do I live into this when I've got bills to pay, food to buy, cook, all of the things of life weighing on me.
Why do I have to eat? It's like a lot of time and energy. It's really
exactly. If I just didn't have to cook.
Having conversations on podcasts all the time. I don't want to eat.
Exactly. Oh, I got to do the dishes again. These things exist for all of us. And so how do we attend to this deep, inner movement at the same time as we have all of this worldly stuff that we're responsible for to continue, so that we honor that, because it's part of our life. So again, this is why feet on the ground feels so right for me. And it is right for so many, because it's not about having the luxury to just pick up and, travel to some ashram somewhere and do the work there. Yes. It has to happen here.
And this brings me to something that, it'll be hard to talk about on this call because it's a very visual model, but something I've been working on for a while that I'd love to have you look at some point is what I call coherence theory. And the idea is that integrity is fractal, right? Like integrity, the smallest moment of our day is reflective of, the largest kind of like this view of our lives are reflected in each moment of our day and kind of at every scale in between. And so, there's this way in which we try to bypass, we try to skip steps, we try to get out of jail free, so to speak. And it always comes to bite us in one way or another. And that's these lessons that life keeps presenting us is like, no, you're still not in integrity. Gotta look at this, gotta integrate that, you kind of dodge that here, but it's coming back over here. And so, my sense, and this goes back to what you said about kind of the acceleration, which is, a word I've used around it. It's almost like there's a gravitational pull to integrity. And as we bring each element of our lives into greater integrity, there's this like self-optimizing, it's almost like an algorithm that teaches itself, things that we don't even know how, like we start to like learn and experience things that we don't feel like like the ordinary strategic mind isn't doing. It's more like that spirit, that life moving through us. And like when I write poetry, for example, it almost doesn't feel, there's no effort. It just feels like it's flowing through me. And there's more and more as I engage with, your work and your practices and like live into this experience that we're talking about, more and more elements of life just feel like I'm simultaneously falling and flying. It's quite a remarkable experience, and all the old cliches about faith and, what's all the, falling, flying, I don't know, jumping off a cliff and then finding the net, leap and the net will appear, all these sayings that I'm forgetting right now, all of them just like, you're like, oh, that's what they were talking about. And that's what's been so powerful for me is I knew all of these things were possible, but until I read your book, I didn't know how to live them out. And until I, and it was your book, and it was also really working with, you and I had a session, Monica and I had a session, Carolina is my coach through DCI, really it was the combination of the book and the actual practical sessions that really just crystallized all of this for me of I can really trust that inner knowing. I don't have to keep, yes, I have the metacognitive skills to reflect, step outside of myself, look at myself honestly, but that doesn't mean I have to constantly put the voice of the strategic ordinary consciousness on the same footing with my inner knowing, because the only things I've ever regretted in life are things that I've done from up here. David White, who, as I said, is a mentor of mine, someone who's really inspired and helped me in crystallizing this work and kind of living out his unique destiny in the world, has really helped me feel permission to do the same myself. So he's a poet and a speaker, and just really, really admire his work. And he says, whether the soul fails or succeeds, it doesn't care. It only cares that it did it its own way, that it, the soul only cares that it was living its own unique journey. It doesn't, the outcome isn't relevant. And that, is really what I feel. I'm no longer, I used to be so like, this has to go this way. And you're just always trying to force an outcome. Whenever we're coercive about things, it never actually, it serves the opposite purpose of what we intend typically, right? Yeah. And so there's this, as I kind of realized how much that wasn't working in the perfect functionality of dysfunction and transformative destruction, it was like, oh, this isn't working. Let me reevaluate this. And the more I started to just surrender to and listen to the inner knowing, however crazy and irrational it seemed, while still, again, reflecting, it's not like we lose all reason or anything, but just learning which voice to listen to has been one of the most healing and transformative experiences of my life, because I used to just not know which one's the right one.
So one of the things that I learned some years back, which was an interesting way of hearing kind of all those voices in our head that we have competing for our attention. You're talking about hearing the voice of the soul. And I've noticed that many people really can't discern that voice amidst the endless cacophony of voices that play out in their minds. And so this technique from Genpo Roshi, he's a Buddhist teacher, philosopher, brought forth an old Buddhist technique. I think his book is called Big Mind, Big Heart. But it's a facilitative technique. You can do it with an individual or you can do it with a group. And so basically the idea is that you start with the kind of what he calls, I think, the lower mind voices, where you just call it forth. So let's say, for example, the voice of the critic. So you invite everybody in the room to speak from the voice of the critic within them. And sure enough, everybody can quite readily access the voice of the critic and speak from it. Nobody in the room is not speaking. Everybody's speaking. And we all see, not only do I have that voice, but so does everybody here. They've all got a critic voice. He then can call forth the voice of the skeptic, or the voice of the doubter, or the voice of anger, whatever it might be. And just keep inviting people to speak from that voice, speak from that voice. So we're being consciously invited to find that voice, give it voice, and to notice it's different from, say, that voice or that voice. You can even invite in, say, the voice of your father, the voice of your mother, anyone that had an influence upon you as a child, whose thoughts perhaps are still underlining the way that you live and think about life, and to speak from that voice. It's like, oh, that's the voice of my father coming through right there. That's the voice of my mother, and them saying this, and this about me. So you can access these different voices. This is a really valuable technique because, again, we're learning to discern. And I noticed one day I was sitting in my car and just thinking about whatever, and then it was, that's that voice. That's the voice of that part of me. And now I see it. It wasn't just autopilot anymore, just a thought passing through that I'm now feeling tense around something that I was automatically criticizing or judging. That's the voice of that. Okay, that helped. Then he calls forth the bigger mind voices, which are, say, the voice of the higher self, the voice of spirit, the voice of great joy, the voice of great love, and invites us to begin to speak from those voices. So let's call forth the voice of great joy. Speak from that. Takes a moment for people to access it sometimes, but then they finally access it. It's like, yeah, I too in me have the voice of great joy. I have the voice of harmony, the voice of great love. So these are the big mind, big heart voices that we have in us, but often get buried amongst, let's call them the more egoic, lower mind voices that can dominate. And so ultimately it comes to this point of, well, how do we access the voice of the soul and live more from that? Because as you were saying, when you live in relationship to and in harmony with the soul, it doesn't matter what you were doing so much. It was, I was there with it. And whether I was doing something mundane and routine, like cleaning the toilet, or whether I was serving a client in my practice, I was with that part of me because I know that part of me, and that part of me is allowed to shine forth at any moment in my day. But if you're not connected to the voice of the soul or great joy or great love, and we don't recognize it as an endless potential that's always there, we just get trapped in the regular flow of thought. So let's call forth great joy. What does great joy sound like? Or great love, great soul.
I love
and give
that.
it voice.
Yeah, that's so interesting, the parallels between traditional psychology and these old psychospiritual, psychotechnologies, as they're called sometimes. Because, I mean, really, modern day psychology is just an extension of these old spiritual traditions. And the more it evolves, it just comes right back to where it started, right? And so, so much of what you're talking about is work that I do with clients in terms of discerning whose voice is that. But more recently, I've been studying internal family systems therapy, which is also, parts work. And it's almost identical to the process that you talked about with Big Mind, Big Heart, calling forth different aspects of the self, speaking with them, asking them questions, getting to know them, understanding think that each of our parts has a positive intention, even if they sometimes have negative consequences, but there's always a positive intent between all of our quality of parts, that it's normal to have different parts. And then they call self energy, like the soul, what you and I might call soul. And sometimes, my clients and I call it like soul self, kind of this merger of like the higher self and the soul. But it's different language sometimes, but it's a lot of just the same truths and the same processes. And that self energy is the playful, creative, just joy. It's the real authentic, the true self, right? Is the way that I best frames it. And so, yeah, what you said, I also was struck by. You said it's always there, that great joy or that harmony that's always there. It's kind of like all the parts of ourselves are always there. I just created a little video that I called the Symphony of Selves. And it's like when we can hold kind of all of the plurality of our parts, the symphony of selves as one great, piece of music, as opposed to this is bad, this is good, this is the face I show, this is the face I hide, you start to see that there's beauty kind of in all of your different faces, even though, some are not pleasant and some are painful, but they all have some kind of constructive purpose when we really take the time to listen to them. And there's a real transmutation when we engage with ourselves in ways that are, invite understanding and curiosity of our different parts, rather than this is bad, I need to make it go away.
Right.
It's paradoxical, right? Like the more we try to shun those parts, the more they sort of get locked in a closet and become feral, and then when we invite them and come into the living room, have some tea, let me get to know you. It's like they can grow up, but they can't actually get their needs met. They become, like developmentally stunted when we keep them aside. And so this invitation, this communication, this welcome of all of the shadow is a necessary aspect of this, ability to engage spiritually in the process of faith and orchestration that we've been talking about. And that's what's challenging sometimes in these conversations. We sometimes just have this tendency to emphasize, oh, how great it is to have this experience of this 5-dimensional reality. And, and it is, it's all beautiful. And also, sometimes I'm paralyzed. Like sometimes I'm in the destruction. Sometimes I'm in the death part of the rebirth. So it's easy to talk about it sort of from the mountaintop and to kind of, not that we have, but I don't want to gloss over how ugly it is sometimes, how really painful it is sometimes. And that people don't need to see themselves as broken because they're in pain, that actually, as you say, it's perfectly functional. It's a necessary part of transformation. Transformation cannot happen without certain aspects of us dying so that they can be reimagined, reconstructed, optimized. It's like an operating system on your computer. If we keep the same operating system forever, things are gradually going to become obsolete. We have to be constantly updating our internal operating systems. And that process is really, from my perspective, a process that defines our character. Am I willing to face life and be changed by it? Am I willing to, engage with life in this relational way that allows me to be constantly upgrading so that I am, more and more equipped to face my own terror, to face my own limitations, to face my own weakness, to face my shadow, to face my paralysis, to face all of these parts. If I engage with them in in this way, they have this transmutative power. And yet at the end of that transmutation, it can be easy to go, oh yeah, now I'm over here. And that wasn't bad,
that wasn't so bad. Yeah. It's very easy to forget what it took to get there. Very easy to forget, right? All the struggle and challenge and heartache and frustration, disappointment that it can take to move beyond all of that into that place where those pieces no longer have much of a grip and not much of life's energy is lost to them. But a tremendous amount of time and energy is given to them to arrive there. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, as you said, that's the functionality of it. It's the nature of the journey. And if we can really accept it, and as you said, the symphony of selves comes into that, accept that full kaleidoscope of selves that we are, then that eases the path. It doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make it straightforward, but it eases things because there's less resistance built into the system to a natural process of change.
Yes, it just reminds me of I've hiked Half Dome 3 times, and it's almost like you look back on, it's like a 20-mile hike in Northern California. You look back on hiking Half Dome, you go, oh, the view, and oh, it was so amazing, and you laugh at all the moments that were hard, and you tell stories, and it's all like rosy in retrospect. And then you're on it again, and you're like, what the hell was I thinking? Like getting on
Yes.
this,
Yes.
like,
Yes.
well, I've done this before, like
Exactly. How did I forget this part? Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
every time, and that's where the cultivation that with, of trust and faith, you trust in life, trust in self, trust in others, and the faith that emerges from that is a result of like, okay, I've been here before. I know I can, I know I'll be on the other side where I'm telling the story that it was, not so bad. But in this moment, it's really okay. And this is, I think, the thing that, is important to pause on and just remind ourselves and remind others of. Like, it's really okay when you're in the breakdown. The breakdown is a vital element of the breakthrough.
Right.
It's like whenever I think I'm stuck, and it never feels this way. I mean, it rarely feels this way. Again, I'm cultivating more faith in it, but in the moment, it's like, I'm just stuck. These are my only options. None of them are working. There's no other way to do it. I'm hopeless. I'm powerless, right? And then inevitably in those experiences in which I feel like there's no options, this other way emerges, because it's necessity is the mother of invention, right? Like, if I feel like there's no possible way to move through this, except for the options I've used, and they're not working, inevitably, if I'm committed to my own work, I somehow, or I, life, spirit, whatever, something, allows me to change in such a way that I find new possibilities that I didn't imagine, and that ultimately empower me and equip me to face future challenges in ways that allow me to be more resilient, more balanced, and just to feel stronger and to feel that trust even in the difficulties.
Yeah. As I like to say, don't let the breakdown break you down.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can see it as that natural, functional part
Mm-hmm.
of a journey into a more resilient, resourceful, connected, alive, aware self,
Mm-hmm.
then it's all going to be worth it. But if it breaks you down, if the breakdown breaks you down, it can be very, very difficult, because now it feels like there really is no light. There is no meaning to this. There's no purpose here. There's no value in it. It's just hard and painful. So I love that we're having this conversation, because I do feel that, again, we're not taught this stuff in school. This is like the most valuable information that we could ever impart to humanity, right? And we're not taught that in school, but we were taught, how to read a map. But we weren't the map of ourselves. We were not taught. So here we are teaching that there is this extraordinary process to be had that can be hard and heavy. It is a breakdown, that we don't need to let it break us down. And sometimes we do need to turn to support to get support for that. This is why I do the deep coaching work. This is why you do the work you do, because people need to understand that there are those who can support the breakdown so that you don't get broken down, that you use it as a way to allow this emergence of that higher reality, that higher selfhood, that greater way of knowing and living to come through. Because in the old metaphor of the butterfly, which I love so much, the butterfly the caterpillar breaks down into kind of a death goo. And that death goo is the nutrient by which the butterfly's cells can begin to emerge again. So the butterfly's emerging cells are born of the death of the caterpillar. They're born within that primordial goo. Again, we don't see that in our lives, that breakdown is what is needed. It's a necessary kind of soil for the emergence of these new ways. So they're kind of little lights that pop up. And for a while, they can be almost invisible until they get enough strength to kind of connect and turn into something. And that's why we have support for that process. So we can sit and say, okay, here's the breakdown. Here's what I'm leaning into. Here's the shadow work that I know I need to do. Here's where my ego dominates my life. Here's where things are hard. And yet, here's the light. Here's the other light. Here's that emerging piece of me. How do I connect those two so they become stronger? And we can do that work through conversation in held spaces, in concert with others.
Right? Yes, and I love that, because that was another sort of illusion that I had, or false belief that I had around spirituality. It was like, I need to go be in a cave, meditate in a cave for 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days, and then I'll, that's the only way. And really to become enlightened, right? And really what I, part of what I took from your program was, spirituality, authentic spirituality emerges so organically from a certain way of being in relationship with others.
Yes.
And, that's something I sort of know and have experienced in different ways, but there's a way in which your coaching style really crystallized that for me in my experience, working with my coach and working with, many of the coaches at the center that I mentioned earlier, yourself included, of course. It was like, oh, this different kind of consciousness is happening. And it doesn't feel like it's something I'm doing. It feels outside of me. It just feels like when and this is, brings us to one of the most important concepts in your book for me, and one of the most important questions you ask, which is, what are the conditions that allow for transformation to occur naturally and with the greatest amount of joy and ease? Because for me, I always felt like there was this effort. I got to work so hard and I got to meditate this many times a day. I'll go on this, and I'll figure it all out in my head or whatever. And it was like, oh, this doesn't have to be work. Actually, this is the opposite of work. It's just an allowance. And allowance is a helpful concept for me because the Buddhists say acceptance, and I think they mean the same thing. But for me personally, what acceptance connotes is effort. I have to accept this. I have to like it. That means I have a positive feeling about it, but I don't have a positive feeling about it, but accept it. And it creates this tension and this inner war in the experience of like trying to accept myself and then mad at myself because I can't accept, but then I'm like, but I don't accept, like there's this whole thing that happens. But allowance, I have no baggage with allowance. It's like, oh, this is what I'm feeling. Cool. It's like the opposite of the bypass that can happen with words like acceptance or even compassion. Like, yes, of course, we want to, compassion is a natural kind of emergent property of, arranging our lives in certain ways as we do this work. But to force yourself to be compassionate with yourself before you've actually integrated the work can actually be at cross purposes with what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's just it. The conditions within the self that allow this journey to unfold with the greatest amount of ease and joy. And what are those conditions? That's the question people ask. Well, what are those conditions that I can foster for myself that allow this journey to unfold? And as you said, as it unfolds of its own volition, there's a natural orientation to understand the way of life, the way of spirit, the way of the dynamics of the world beyond the world that we've known before. That naturally comes into it, either through learning from others, from personal experience, but it naturally shows up. So always just we come back to what those conditions are, because if we create the conditions, then we are naturally going to facilitate allowance. It's going to come with greater ease. There's going to be more joy in the process, more trust. We started our conversation with trust. There's going to be more of that attuning to what is trying to emerge here. What is life calling forth from me? What is my role in this as a partner of life with that person, rather than fighting them? How do we partner together to create the life that we desire or the world that we desire? And one of those conditions you mentioned early on about slowing down, right? And you said how hard that was. That's the first of our conditions, if you will, those optimal conditions. And it's like, how do we even slow down life enough to allow more reflection time, more alone time, more time for that inner work? Because as we talked about, that fourth stage, powered by reflection, is often when people start to withdraw from the world they've known to create that time and space. But the imposition of the world they've known, the responsibilities, the duties, the busyness, the go, get in the way. So slowing down, just creating spaciousness in your life, spaciousness in your mind, in your activities, is so hard for people.
But so life-changing. Like, you get so much more done with so much less time when you're not spread so thin. I mean, this is also an aspect of my peak performance and flow neuroscience training. It's like the way that we orchestrate our lives in this scatter plot sort of orientation to everything is not only, unpleasant, but it's also inefficient. And we're trying to get more done. We're spending more energy doing less. And there's this incredible thing that's happened for me that I was trying to cram everything in. I was trying to get so much done and achieve all these goals. And then all of a sudden, when I before I engaged with your program and started reading your book, I just knew, like, when I read your book, I was like, this is what I'm called to right now. This has to be more important than everything else. And I made that the priority. And then when I did, and I slowed down, all of the things, like, I've been wanting to start a podcast for 2 years, and here we are.
Look, yeah.
And that wouldn't have been possible, if I hadn't slowed down, because things were out of alignment for me. And so they weren't sustainable. They couldn't just creatively emerge organically. Authentic. And I don't like to do things that don't feel authentic and in integrity. So it was like I couldn't get anything off the ground because that piece of my life was not in integrity. And even though, it's not like I'm sitting around doing nothing all day, but there was a way in which the next steps that I knew I was called to, I couldn't actually live into because that piece was missing, excuse me. Yeah. So I have you to thank for that. And it's been a great joy and honor and privilege to speak with you today, Leon. And I see that we're running out on time, but just really appreciate your time. And I hope we can do it again sometime.
Excellent. It's been really good, really good. And I am available anytime. People can reach out to me, Center for Transformational Coaching, if they'd like to contact or learn about our programs at the center. Everyone is welcome.
And his book is called A Shift in Being. Yeah. You say it. I want to get
A Shift in Being. Correct. Yes. A Shift in Being, available on all online book retailers with the push of a button.
The Art and Practice of Deep Transformational Coaching is the subtitle, I believe. Yeah. And a really powerful book, really transformative for me personally. And as someone who's been in personal psychospiritual development for 20 years, it has probably been the most influential book that I have read that has had a lasting influence on my life. And that's saying a lot, because I've read a lot and I've been working in this space for a long time. So I'm just really, really grateful to speak to you. And I hope we can do it again sometime.
Anytime. I am here. Thank you.